someone of a lower status in your cast being shoved in a fridge just so your hero has something to do, that's known as fridging.
Mm-hmm. That's it's so funny because it's like, oh no, poor Green Lantern, his girlfriend, he's got to go now. It's like, well, also poor girlfriend got murdered and
Poor
shoved
Yeah.
into a
girlfriend.
refrigerator.
That's the exact joke. Yes, no, it is
Yeah.
the, oh no, this, what a terrible day for this man. He's a
Yeah.
game opened his fridge. Yes.
What a terrible day for this man.
Welcome to Pros and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers. Brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Aora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land that this podcast was created on.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to Pros and Cons, a writing podcast for writers by writers, because sometimes we feel like pros and sometimes we feel like cons. Joining us today, we have James Healy.
Hello, I'm James City. I'm a writer. I dabble in horror and science fiction, and I'm known for cooling engines.
Amazing. Thank you, James. And we are also joined today by Phoenix, which I think is nice and special because you and I, we don't cross time zones very often lately.
No.
I don't know who you are anymore.
Hello.
Remind me what you do, Phoenix.
Well, Ellie, I'm coming at you right over the tea mug. Like I've got this right in between the mic and my mouth. It feels very intimate. But I'm an editor primarily. I'm a writer and editor. So I'm the founder of Bent Light Writing. We put an emphasis on authenticity reading, growing a list of authenticity readers to help bring out the most authentic version of a story. On top of that, yes, I write. The brain is not moving very fast right now. I'm like, yes, I do write. What do I do about that?
Sometimes do a bit of writing,
Sometimes do a bit of
allegedly.
writing.
Allegedly.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm studying for a diploma in a diploma to teach English as a second language. So that's been going very well and very fun.
Which is amazing. No. And I imagine you'll be so good at that. You've got good teacher energy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited
I
about
can
it.
already see that's going to be a big success, a wild success for you. All right. And to introduce myself, I'm Ali Burnham. I write across film, TV, prose, and comics. For those who are
Woo!
listening, I'm holding up a brand new issue of the Metropius issue 2,
So
which
cool.
was about a year in gestation. I won't bore you with the details, but that we've had a change of artist, so that was just a hiccup in the pipeline. But the next couple of issues should come out relatively quick now that that's solved. But it's still as gorgeous as ever.
So
Everyone
cool.
who's listening at home, just imagine beautiful black and white art deco goodness for your eyes is what I'm
It's so
holding up to
good.
the camera.
It's so weird to
Uh,
see Metropius with a different cover because I've so firmly associated the cover of issue one with Metropius. It's like, oh my gosh, it's a different picture. Like I can't. It's
it
wild.
actually has different pictures now. Yes, so and it was fun flicking through it and reading it for the first, yeah, for the first time because it's been like a good 2.5 years since I wrote the plot for that. So I'm like flicking through it, being like, what happened? Oh, yeah, that happened. That's kind of
Wow.
cool.
Yeah.
I agree with all these decisions being made, maybe because I'm a bit biased. It's like confirmation bias, being like, oh, what a cool thing for that character to do. But yes, Forgotten Rose, the story continues. So you can either buy that online you can go just straight onto the Metropius webpage and buy it. Otherwise, I know if you're a Sydney local, King's Comic in the city has it stocked. Very likely, I think the Brisbane comic book shops have them all stocked as well. But yes, in doubt, go onto the Metropius webpage and order yourself a comic. So
Very cool.
today's topic,
Mhm.
in a high stakes, is there a character death? Kind of. Anyway, no spoilers. But today's topic, we're
I think you just
talking all about character deaths.
you did an
Um,
anti-spoiler. You made does a character die? Kind of.
does a
Maybe.
character die? Sort of.
Maybe. I don't even know what that means.
You're just going to have to read to find out what that means. But yes, we're going to be talking about a lot of different media that has characters who die in them. And we're going to dissect how the character died, if they died well, and what lessons we can learn if we as writers want to write a good, powerful character death that's going to land and have the right emotional resonance. Before we begin, though, I'm just going to do like a speed run spoiler alert, because the only way to really talk about character deaths is we're going to be talking about a whole heap of TV shows and books that have dramatic character deaths. So if you're not across them, and you hear a piece of media I'm about to mention in this list that you are intending to read or watch, maybe give this episode a skip for now, go and watch that thing, be like, and then come back, and then we can all have fun and dissect it together. So this fun spoiler warning list, I know we'll definitely be talking about Lord of the Rings, Lion King, Star Wars, Trigun, Full Metal Alchemist, Stormlight Archive, at least up to book 4, Jade City, Halo, Game of Thrones, Death Note, Man of Steel, Under the Dome, The Terror, and Arcane, specifically Season 2. So you have been warned. If any of those scare you and you're like, no, I'm about to finish watching that, go off and do that. But for everyone else, we'll hopefully be still sticking to that list. Every now and then we might veer off unexpectedly, but if we're about to mention a new piece of media, we'll try and give like a 10-second warning so you have time to fumble and press the pause button. So I want this to be as friendly as possible so you can listen to it without fear of beloved media being spoiled, because some of the character deaths I do want to share are the character deaths that really got me, either not just emotionally, but the shock value. Like it was a shock that worked well. So off the back of that, essentially there are in my thinking, two different ways I defined a character death. And there were the ones that the character death had been used for shock, pain, and dismay. So it is the one that comes unexpectedly, causes genuine shock, and then the rest of the plot almost has to deal with the repercussions of that character's death.
Yeah.
And then the other kind of character death category I was thinking of are the end of the story death, where it does have this sense of inevitability to it. It feels well earned. Yes, it is painful, but at the same time, it is kind of this sense of, oh, that was the natural conclusion of this story, though. So I've kind of put them into these two different categories. James or Phoenix, is there potentially a category I'm missing or another type of death worth exploring as to how it sits in the plot?
It probably falls into consequences, but sometimes a death early on sets the stakes for the show. I guess that is kind of consequences.
Yeah.
It kind of shows like this is what could happen if things go wrong for you.
One of the categories I have was deaths as a currency, which I think these are usually where I find the weakest deaths, where it's just like we're trading a character in exchange for a significant plot gain. Like I need to get the characters out of this situation, so I'm going to trade a character life to add significance to the fact that they got out of it. Specifically thinking of a Harry Potter spoiler in 3, 2, 1, Dobby. Like that death was just like, oh, they got out of there. We got to kill someone. All right, Dobby's dead. Like the cost of that escape was Dobby. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I did, before we dove, I'm going to keep saying this all the time, but before we dive into really good character deaths and the ones I love and done really well, I thought let's get some bad character deaths out of the way, the ones we thought were potentially cheap, maybe didn't work that well. And specifically, there was a term, if our listeners aren't familiar with it, is the idea of fridging. Is this a term either of you have heard tossed around?
No.
Oh my gosh,
but I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Okay, to fridge a character is the verb, and it comes from a writing trope and I looked it up earlier. It was coined by Gail Simone, who writes comics, and she coined it in 1999. And it was called Women in Refrigerators. And she used this to describe a trend in fiction, which involves female characters facing disproportionate harm, such as death, maiming, or assault, to serve as a plot device to motivate male characters, an event colloquially known as fridging. So the term specifically is referring to a Green Lantern comic. It's got even the number here. That's how infamous this became. Volume
Wow.
3, number 54 in 1994, written by Ron Mars. So the story includes a scene in which the title hero, Kyle Rayner, comes home to his apartment and finds that the villain, Major Force, has killed his girlfriend, Alexandra DeWitt, and has stuffed her body into a refrigerator. So it's famous for being this comic panel where the male hero just comes home one day, opens up his fridge door, and his girlfriend's corpse has been shoved into the fridge. And it was almost like this final straw moment, I guess, for a lot of comic book fans and female fans of comics who are like, all right, we're finally sick of women getting shoved in refrigerators just to motivate the male character, just so they can be sent on a journey of revenge. It's almost as if the plot couldn't walk into the room any other way except for the body of the girlfriend being found in a refrigerator. So ever since then, it's this wonderful term to fridge a character. So it's just be mindful that if you are killing a character just to motivate your hero, and especially if they happen to be like disenfranchised, are they a woman? Are they a child even? Are they just someone of a lower status in your cast being shoved in a fridge just so your hero has something to do? That's known as fridging.
That's it's so funny because it's like, oh no, poor Green Lantern, his girlfriend, he's got to go now. It's like, well, also poor girlfriend got murdered and shoved into a refrigerator.
That's the exact joke. Yes, no, it is oh no, what a terrible day for this man. He came opened his fridge. Yes.
What a terrible day for this man.
Just for our listeners who haven't heard of fridging, it's just a really great measuring stick now that if you are killing a character, maybe just hold up fridging and ask yourself, oh no, am I just stuffing this character in a fridge for no better reason? What are some things I can do? Like maybe you do want to genuinely kill this character. Maybe a lot of your plot revolves around killing this character. So I hope this whole episode will give you some other tools and tricks and ways to not just exploit the death, but make it an earned death. How to kill them well.
Yeah.
Off the back of that, while we're talking about deaths that perhaps aren't done so well, I just want to get off onto the table and then get it off the table is the idea of the death of the mentor. I feel like it's a really potent trope the first time you see it. And the reason it is potent is because it's the first time you see it. It's a great trope because it works well. It is literally embedded into the hero's journey plot. That's why you see it again and again. So I'm not knocking it because it is your very first experience of it. And feel free to jump in, Phoenix. May have been when kids are watching The Lion King. And would you like to take a moment here to explain why that is so good if that is the very first time you're watching that trope?
Well, it's when I was thinking before this, I had specifically Lion King and then another, I should have said Harry Potter for the beginning of this, but it's a little bit older, so I didn't think to. But Dumbledore is like that's like Death of a Mentor done very, very well in my book. Like but the whole thing is that the death of Mufasa and the death of Dumbledore, they both fundamentally alter the plot and it completely alters the world and takes the safety blanket off for Harry Potter and Simba and fundamentally changes how the world treats them. So it's suddenly they're left in the aftermath of needing to navigate, whatever the repercussions of that are. I'm trying to think specifically of the like Mufasa's death and how I I don't know. I was a kid when I saw it, so it was just very raw shock.
Yeah, no, I think that one all stays with us. I think we all go, oh yes, Death of Mufasa, because it would have gotten us at just the right age. It would have been
Mm,
shocking enough that we weren't expecting the parent to die. I feel like we get a lot of stories where the parents are already dead, so we don't have to deal with the parent dying at the midpoint of the story. But Mufasa gets like a lot of good screen time, and you look up to
mm,
Mufasa, and he's a good leader and he's a good father, and then it happens in quite a traumatic way.
mm.
And I've heard, I was just reading this on the internet, so take it with a grain of salt, but like original cuts of the storyboard were like shown to test screenings of kids, and it was like more heart-wrenching than the final cut, and they just had rooms full of children bawling their eyes out.
Gosh.
So they kind of had to literally go back to the storyboard. They're like, all right, we'll just dial it back, like of just how I guess the tension of the moment of Simba being so helpless and not being able to help. I feel like children were still bawling anyway, but the difference between bawling and watching the rest of the movie and being so inconsolable they can't watch the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Um,
They also have like Simba spending time with the body after it's dead, like he cuddles up next to his
yes.
father. It's very like it's actually a pretty raw representation of death. Like
Mm. Yeah, no, it's
pretty
done
well done.
exceptionally well. Dumbledore, a great shock. Just to get the other obvious ones off the table, kind of a swerve and a miss, but we've got Gandalf
Mm,
in Fellowship. I mean, works really well for the plot, has a lot of great emotional ramifications for Frodo in particular. Ultimately does get undermined later in the story because Gandalf's back and it's great.
okay.
But at the
Two
time,
Towers,
yeah.
Gandalf's back. We're going crazy. We don't know what's happening next. He's white now. It's wild.
And then even Obi-Wan from
Mm,
the first Star Wars,
yeah.
I got to use first with the asterisk, the first Star Wars, however you want to interpret the order of your Star Wars.
Hmm.
But yeah, so again, these are very typical examples of uh, the death of the mentor in the hero's journey structure. I feel like maybe you could line up all those movies and books, and the death is probably happening at the same pacing moment across
Mm.
all of them as well. So it's done to death because it is effective. So not knocking
It's
it for
done to
that.
death.
Done to death. Another potential episode title. We're going to be full of them. Um, Getting it out of the way so we're acknowledging their good deaths when done well. Great. I'm really interested in now looking at what are some other deaths that aren't the death of the mentor. We're writing a story where maybe we don't have a mentor. Who else are we going to kill? Why are we going to kill them? So when I was thinking about this, something popped up, and maybe we might keep circling back to this. But a good death, I found again and again, worked really well because a part of what it was doing was really manipulating our core beliefs. And I'm using our in the terms of the audience, in terms of, is it undermining our sense of goodness equals reward? So say just our general upbringing, the layers of religious culture that are upon society, even if you yourself don't identify as religious, we still have a lot of these inbuilt pillars that, being good will equal some kind of reward. And then manipulating hero's journey expectations because we're so used to that. And then also this idea of redemption as well. If someone who may start the story in a bad place or doing bad things, we have a lot of expectations of that character. If they're going to pull themselves out of that hole, if they're going to become a better person, they deserve the chance to be a better person. I feel like we can keep coming back to this as we look at the 4 kind of case study character deaths I'm going to throw at both of you, but it struck me as interesting that the 4 I chose in some way are manipulating those expectations we have just deeply rooted into us that we probably don't even realize that we go through the day, our lives, that if we're good, we're like, oh, goodness is rewarded, yes, and badness is punished. These are just, I'm not actively thinking that day to day, but clearly a part of me must believe that because that's why these deaths shocked me at the moment they happened. And three other framing questions that I'm going to layer onto these deaths that I think are really interesting for us as writers to consider is, when in the story is the character dying? Because that you'll make a lot of different decisions based on. I think James has a few examples of some inciting incident deaths, and then some end of the story deaths, or are they meant to be midpoint shockers? What emotion do you want to achieve? As in, is it just raw shock value, which has its place? Sometimes we do want a death to achieve shock. And I guess as a writer, I know this because I tried to write a character death once. And all my beta readers were like, oh yeah, okay, they're dead now. And I'm like, oh, I was hoping that would be more of a shock. So I had to really go away and ask myself, well, what tools would line it up to actually be a shock? And then how does that character death affect the wider cast? I think all the examples we'll discuss, we're almost going to be talking about the reverberations, the ramifications this person's death has on everyone else. And a lot of how your audience, your reader will feel will be mirrored by what the wider cast is feeling. So it's an easy kind of, if you want to tell the audience how to feel, just explore that emotion with every other kind of viewpoint character you've got going on. Did either of you want to jump in with any thoughts, or if that made you think of any examples while I was talking that through?
I guess I just quickly wanted to, because I feel like I had foggy brain last time I brought it up, but I really just back to Dumbledore's death in terms of recontextualizing things and the wider ramifications that follow. One of the reasons why I love that death so much was it happened at the end of movie 6 or book 6 or whatever. And then it's like a significant it changes like the culture in the petri dish of that story so much in the following book, where suddenly it becomes this like mystery of actually like fully recontextualizing Dumbledore, who he was, what he meant to Harry Potter. And he fully changes as a focal point in the sense of like he becomes mildly villainized in order for Harry Potter to realize himself. I thought it did some really cool stuff in terms of like what it meant for him to lose his mentor and find himself, like that stage. And for how much it recontextualized everything and changed the full tone around Dumbledore. I thought that was very cool. I remember having both a painful and great time in book 7 because of that.
I think that's a really good point. Even though Dumbledore died, he was still incredibly present in the later book, and there was an arc he went on in the sense that we were learning new information about him. So our relationship with Dumbledore continued to evolve and change, and we still had emotions about this character, even though they were technically dead. I think you're right. That is a success of a dead character, and it does mirror life in a way. I think that when someone does pass, that then suddenly that's the opportunity to think about them a lot. And you find yourself examining their life, looking back on their life, and your relationship with them can evolve while you go on that journey. And I think that was captured quite well. So, and
it's also like I like that it's not because a lot of the mentor death, it's like, you know, your hero then finds themselves with questions, but it's usually around the plot. Like it's like, or the most typical one would be like, you know, I don't know which way to go, or I don't know how to kill this person, and you want to ask that person. But I felt like that touched on some very real death emotions in the sense of like Harry was suddenly coming up against like his idol being dragged through the mud and him having these doubts on a more human level. And it's like this feeling of wanting to just ask him, like wanting to ask the person, but they can't. But it's not so much like just about like, how do I defeat Voldemort? That as well. But it's also just like, Dumbledore, who do I believe? Like, what even, who are you? Like, and I thought that was very potent.
Yeah, perhaps JK, because she has the very big death with Sirius Black, and then like 2 books later we get Dumbledore. And I was just thinking in my mind how Sirius, that recontextualization doesn't really happen for Sirius. Sirius continues to remain this missed opportunity. Like that was what was so painful about. Like they were becoming closer. He was about to become the father he never had, and then he was robbed of that. And so he just remains this pain, this wound, but he does leave the picture a little bit. He, while Dumbledore remains incredibly examined and important. So it was perhaps either something JK learned to do between books, or that was always the plan. I just found that really.
Yeah, the thing as well with Dumbledore, and I think this is part of the death of the mentor trope, is that it kind of forces growing up kind of very suddenly. Like it's almost like the mirroring of like the death of the parent. It's kind of like now you're the adult in the room kind of thing. And I think that might have also been what the difference between Sirius and Dumbledore was that Sirius was almost becoming like a parent, you know what I mean? And Harry was kind of within grasp of that. Whereas with Dumbledore, he went out of Dumbledore because part of it was seeing Dumbledore in a different light. And that's kind of a symbolic death of the parent. And then his actual disappearance was now Harry has to go on and kind of process all of that, but he can't process it through speaking with him. So you just have to figure it out for yourself.
And I guess it is a contrast that Dumbledore was the person who helped Harry get through Sirius's death. So then when Dumbledore dies, there is no one there to help him get through that death.
Fun little fact, the death of Sirius was the only time I've bawled, like fully sobbed while reading. Like, and it's such a funny process bawling while reading, because reading is an active process. So it's literally like I was sat there on the couch. Yeah, you're like, oh, and then you have to turn the page, and it's like there's something so funny about needing to turn a page to continue reading and crying.
No, it's true.
In my mind, you've stopped crying to turn the page and then started crying.
So then keep on crying.
There probably was like a tiny little pause. Like, I don't know.
Put it together for
because
us.
There's something stoic about crying while you're watching a movie or something, because you can kind of just sit there quietly and just like
it's happening to you. It's just like,
but it keeps going, yeah. While the book is like, you look away and you're like, all right,
yeah.
All right. I might move on to my first case study then.
Yes.
But open to both of you that if talking it through reminds you of another death similar to it, feel free to jump in. So have either of you watched the original Trigun anime?
No. I think I saw episode 1. Is that's the guy with the very stereotype it's like fully red sort of trench coat?
Yes.
And yes, I saw episode 1.
Excellent. Yes.
Do not remember.
And the reason I'm saying original is because they've recently done Stampede, but Stampede, I might end up doing another episode down the line on Stampede, in that it's not actually a sequel. It's kind of a reimagining that is in conversation with the original. It's a very cool way of approaching the idea of a reboot. So I'm talking about the original, and I can't really comment on the manga because I haven't read the manga. So this is straight down the line. I'm talking specifically about the original anime. But this is a death that falls into the end of the story death category, one that is somewhat inevitable, but is still shocking and is still painful, but you reflect on it as this feels like an ending. It's not kind of the shock of, oh, this is going to propel a new plot forward because this character has died, but oh, this I feel satisfied this is how the story ends, even though, oh no, this character we love is dead. So good old Wolfwood. Again, I don't know if either of you heard of the meme that was going around last year, which was Biggless Dickless Wolfwood recommends this is how you lose the Time War. I don't know if that's just going over heads.
Anyway, over my head.
A mismatch of references in one sentiment. That's what that feels like.
It was.
Yeah.
Maybe you picked up on the Monty Python reference in there. It was a huge hubbub in the publishing industry that someone with just a random Twitter account, which was named Biggless Dickless Wolfwood, which was both the Monty Python and this Wolfwood, the Trigun reference, suddenly shouted about how much they loved this book, This Is How You Lose the Time War. This was a nobody. This is just like, they were a cosplayer who just tweeted random anime things sometimes. And then they're like, go and buy this book. It's amazing. This meme goes... their post goes viral. Suddenly, This Is How You Lose the Time War is a New York bestseller off the strength of this one tweet. And they were literally making stickers. Like, you know how when a book wins an award and they put a sticker on it being like, won this award. Bookstores were putting stickers that was like, as recommended by Biggless Dickless Wolfwood.
Oh my gosh.
Book. That was the sticker they were putting on the cover. So anyway, it was a moment for the publishing world.
Wow.
We are literally talking about this Wolfwood from Trigun. So well loved in fandom circles. Wolfwood is a really interesting character, and why I think his death works well is the whole build up. I think it's only a one season, so it's a one beautiful season of the show. This is a character that otherwise would have been okay with death. They're depressed. They make a lot of like rash decisions that put themselves in danger quite frequently. They're in a lot of firefights, and probably a lot of their bravery is rooted in this sense of, if I take a bullet tomorrow, I don't care. Maybe that's a bit of a reprieve. Yahoo! Is the attitude of Wolfwood. Wolfwood goes on a really satisfying journey of becoming best mates. I'm going to put best mates in quotation marks. If you read it through a queer lens, you're going to have an even better time becoming really good friends with the lead character, Vash. They become very close, let's just say that. And they bring out the best in each other. They fight a lot, they bicker a lot, but then also what Vash is ultimately teaching Wolfwood is to care about life, to care about the value of life, the value of other people's lives, and then ultimately the value of his own life, which is a really special journey to go on.
Wow.
And therefore, and you get a penultimate betrayal as well, where you secretly learn Wolfwood has actually been set up to ultimately bring about Vash's death. So he happily took on this job at the start in secret, but oh no, they secretly became really close friends along the way. But he still goes through with the betrayal. And then you've got this 11th hour of undoing the betrayal and coming back around and helping Vash. And it's quite wonderful. It's incredibly satisfying. But part of his moment of redemption is he doesn't survive this final firefight where he's trying to undo the betrayal he's caused. And because of the effect Vash has had on him, he doesn't want to die anymore. He finally got to a point where he wants to live, but this is fine. This is the firefight that kills him in the end. And he does die alone. It's this beautiful, he's kind of got this Undertaker, he's surrounded by a lot of Christian imagery the whole season, which is quite beautiful to watch. And then it is this abandoned church that he's bleeding to death. He doesn't want anyone to see him die. So he kind of drags himself into this church, and he's like, I don't know if God's real. It's kind of funny. But he's like, damn it, I don't actually want to die. And then he does bleed out and die. And it is,
Oh, that's good.
it's a beautiful death, a beautiful, well-earned death. You can see how it kicks a fandom in the guts because they've just watched this incredible arc of change and redemption. But then he does kind of reach that's a satisfying end and an inevitable end of where this character was going. Does that make you think of any other examples that kind of achieve that end of the arc? Beautiful earned death.
It made me think a lot about Cowboy Bebop. Maybe just similar imagery. You're talking about fighting in a abandoned church. He doesn't die in that moment,
There
but
you
I
were
just
taken straight to Cowboy Bebop.
yeah, I got taken straight to actually for a moment I was like, are we talking? Is this Cowboy Bebop? No, okay, it's not. But
I
it
think
was
Japan loves just throwing Christian imagery into everything. It's beautiful.
very possible. Just a very poetic death. His like Spike and Servius, I can't remember his rival's name.
Vicious.
Vicious, yes. Spike and Vicious almost ascend from being humans and become like they dip into humanity, but they also like ascend to this like just pure archetype energy where they almost exist outside of them, and their rivalry exist outside of the rest of humanity and the other characters. So when he dies, it's less like the one you just said felt quite a bit more human. Spike's felt quite a bit more just like very almost mythical, poetic. Like it's hero coming to the end of their journey, openly accepting death, and they die right there on the end, they accomplish what they've wanted to accomplish at the end of what their accomplishment marks their death as well, and you pan out from there, which it felt very earned, felt very poetic, a little less human, but it reminded me of that.
Yeah, no, that is beautiful. It is kind of this when the characters start to represent modes of being, or they're the ideas, and that's the idea that either can no longer live on or must die to satisfy the point of the story. I realize the other thing that's quite human about Wolfwood's death that I quite like is because he is in this like mental turmoil the whole time, and for the majority of the story is in a place where he would be quite happy to die. Say cosmically, us as an audience watching that, we wouldn't be satisfied watching him die while he's in that mental state. It's kind of only once he's pulled himself into a place of mental stability, like he is healed, he is well. It's only then that we would like to watch that character die, if that makes sense. Like that's the time that it feels cosmically okay to accept that death.
Yeah.
That's me just bringing it back to, again, kind of examining what are these pillars within us just culturally that we are okay with that death is manipulating. So the idea that it wouldn't have been satisfying if this poor mentally ill man died in a firefight, but then it was only once he had mental stability and was at peace for him to die. That, I don't know, that just spoke to something within me, I guess, and I think is universal in a way that's for death to strike, then that's when it seemed to really resonate and touch something within us.
Yeah, I think there is something generally very comforting about seeing characters facing death or just accepting that that's what's happening. I think that is maybe speaks to an underlying subconscious tension that we all have about death, that when we see someone not necessarily facing it bravely, but facing it with like a sense of peace, typically if it's because they've accomplished something or because they've done something that's put them in a place where they're like, almost like a redemption, or almost like at least I got that done kind of thing. I think that's something that makes us all probably feel a little bit better about the prospect ourselves.
It helps us like organize it in our minds a little bit. It's like, and that's where death fits, where in reality it doesn't have a place where it fits. It comes at any moment and it does whatever. So it's a very comfortable way to view death.
Yeah, that's story doing what story does, isn't it? Kind of framing the chaos of life in a way that is digestible.
I'm so hesitant about spoilers, so I don't want to say too much, but a film I absolutely love, which is The Thin Red Line, depicting a bunch of different soldiers at war in the 1940-something Guadalcanal campaign. And as you see death throughout the whole film, but there's one character who meets their death in that film just with a sense of calm and acceptance, and everything about it. I do think there's a lot of the framing is very kind of Christian iconography with the camera looking up, and the music and everything that's going on. It really frames that character's death against the other characters in terms of, well, how did this character live that allowed them to face it in a different way from these other characters, which is really quite kind of ties a little bow on a lot of what the story is telling.
It's when you look at stories from the outside, it is kind of tempting to be like, oh, how convenient that the death fits so nicely there. But then the other way to think about it is, well, the death is going to fit nicely because in the case of these things, the story is about this person's death. So the focal point, the story is structured to frame the death. So it is going to be well placed. That's what the story's about. And so it's important to acknowledge that as well. You're structuring the story to get to that point of death. So it is going to be well framed.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Kind of going back to one of the questions I wanted to kind of layer onto every one of these is, when does the death happen in the story? And we're talking about these inevitable deaths that are happening at the end. You're right. If this is your ending, it's because you've been barreling towards it the whole time. You've been in conversation with what this ending is going to be all the way until the end. So it makes sense that this death needs to summarize the themes of your whole work. So
you've been groomed for this death. The movie has been grooming you to arrive at this death.
I love that. That's a great way to phrase it. All right, pivoting then to, so if on one hand that those were the deaths that were still sad, shocking to a degree that, oh no, wouldn't it have been, we wanted them to live, but more on the inevitable side of the scale rather than pure raw shock. I now wanted to talk about character deaths that have either made you gasp, you genuinely didn't see coming, have rattled you because perhaps they happen in earlier in the book or at the midpoint. So the next case study I wanted to throw out there was Hughes from Full Metal Alchemist. I'll ask you, Phoenix, that when you think of Hughes, do you have like an initial emotional reaction?
Like unsatisfied frustration. I don't know. Like that's
You're more on the
unresolution.
frustrated side of Hughes's death?
Yeah, because just unsatisfying. That's what it is. Like it's just like unsatisfying, but not because it's poorly written, unsatisfying circumstantially for what it means in the story. It's like, no, cool guy. He was just piecing things like he's so smart. Like he's the only one that pieced this thing together. But like
That's why he's gotta
way
die.
ahead of that's why he's got to die exactly. Way ahead of the protagonist. So it's just like, oh, dang it. Don't know so much. You just have to know less, Hughes.
And then you won't be a target for an assassination.
Hmm.
So for context for everyone listening, Hughes from Full Metal Alchemist, he is treated as comic relief very early on.
Yeah,
I also
that's
will
true.
add that I'm talking about the original run of Full Metal Alchemist, not Brotherhood. I
Mm.
will argue that I think Brotherhood is a fundamentally different genre.
Hmm.
While Brotherhood is more of an action shonen anime, the original run is a character case study. So
Mm.
it has a slower pace because it wants you to spend more time with the characters. So specifically, if you're going to go on the Hughes's death ride properly, do the original anime. But yes, he's introduced as comic relief. He just looks like initially this side character who's just here to make jokes about. He's always the ongoing gag is his daughter's just turned 3 years old, and he's always carrying a picture of his daughter in his pocket, and he will force this picture upon anyone in his vicinity. He's like, "Look how perfect my 3-year-old daughter is,"
Yeah. And his
and
wife.
they
Yeah.
and his wife. He just loves his family, but this is a comedy beat in that he's annoying everyone around him with how extra he is. He's got to invite all the characters around for dinner all the time because he's like, you got to meet my wife, you got to meet my daughter. It's like I'm saying it out loud, but we're talking about a character on character death, so it does a good job of not being the trope of like the day before retirement, right? Where it's like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
finally get to go home and spend time with my family, then they're shot. No, it does a good job of not being that. But
Yeah.
in hindsight, you're like, oh, he was the character talking about his daughter all the time. So it was more solidly done. The swerve was making him such an over-the-top comedy character. He also, as he evolves, it's very clear he's every other character's emotional rock. As every other character, so you've got your Roy Mustang character who, just for the sake of this overview, let's call him a war criminal in the past. He's done some atrocious things. You're laughing at me calling Roy a war criminal. He
Yeah.
is. He's trying to be better though. He's trying to like make up for his mistakes of his past. But whenever he's has a moment of doubt in that struggle, Hughes is the character he goes to because Hughes was there as well in the war. He can be like, I'm trying to do the right thing. Hughes, can you tell me what the right thing to do is? Because I don't know, I might be acting too war criminally. I don't know. I'm carrying trauma. And then also for the main
Is this a
character.
little war criminally?
It's a little war
Should
criminally.
I tone down?
I might be acting
Do I
too
need to
much
reel
like
it
a
in?
war criminal today.
Little war criminally.
And then likewise for the kids, so Edward Elric and Alphonse, who are meant to be pitched at like, I don't know, are they 14 and 16? I'm trying to get a hang of their
Yeah,
ages.
about that. I think
Yeah,
Ed is
teenage
16.
boys. Hughes is the one who, like, when they arrive in the big city, he takes them home and he's kind of like, my wife's gonna cook you dinner. He makes sure these boys are looked after. So where Roy is treating them like soldiers in the military, Hughes is treating them like the teenage boys that they are. He's treating them like the kids and giving them like the emotional support and reassurance that they need. And it kind of, as these characters get to be like, oh wait, I can just go over to Hughes's place and just sit on the couch and act like a teenage boy. I don't have to act like a soldier around Hughes. So the story does a beautiful job that he is everyone else's emotional rock, which, as you're about to see why that is such an excellent choice for a writer to make when you're about to choose what character you want to kill for maximum effect. It's almost as if in Lord of the Rings they decided to kill their Samwise at a really crucial moment. Like that's
Whoa.
Even the suggestion of that has affected me.
you're like,
Whoa.
oh.
Oh my God.
Don't,
That would have
thought
been
but
a
about that.
it's
different story.
but it's a similar parallel. It's like you've got this
Yeah.
incredibly competent character who's emotionally stable. They stabilize everyone else around them. Hughes figures out a piece of information faster than everyone else. He's alone when he does it. He's like, I need to ring Roy. Gets himself, he's been shot. I'm trying to remember exactly what happens, but he's like literally when he's like thumbing through the library going like fuck, 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 as he's looking at the maps. And then he's like, I can't make a phone call on any of the military phone lines, which is an excellent hint. We don't know exactly what he's discovered, which is an excellent part of this storytelling. We just know there's a discovery. He's got to tell someone, and he can't do it within the military compound because he'll be overheard. So that's a great foreshadowing for who the eventual bad guys are.
And part of the
He gets
setup
himself,
for the mystery of the other characters is the fact that he's dragged himself outside of the military
why
compound
did
to a
he leave?
payphone. Like, why did he go
Yes.
to a payphone? Like, so
Yeah.
sorry, I just
So
got
yeah,
swept away. I had
no,
to go.
you're right. It's a clue that the rest have to
Mhm.
follow. Why didn't he just ring inside the building?
Mhm.
But while he's in the library, he is stabbed by an assailant. He has to drag himself out. He's bleeding out, but he's like, got to get to a payphone. Got to get to a payphone. He tries to ring, but the assassins get to him first, and it's a very upsetting death. Hughes gets done in the phone booth, and that's where his body's found by Roy and everyone later. So it's such an emotional blow to every other character because it's a moment they realize how much they had been relying on him for their own stability to get through what is coming, and the idea that they have to suddenly face like Frodo would have to ask himself, how do I climb Mount Doom without a Samwise? It's like it's just that moment of terror of we don't got this. You've taken Hughes away from they all live in that fear and that pain. It's hard for them to process the pain because the plot is upon them. It's been an assassination. It's within military ranks. They are the military. They are now the people who have to investigate this. So they don't have a lot of time to digest it. And then you just get wonderful scenes where, like, I'm pretty sure Roy is the one who then has to go and tell the wife and 3-year-old daughter what's happened. And we've just been seeded in with how much Hughes was an excellent family man to them. Anyway, gutting. Anyway, I still talk about Hughes and I'm like, oh, this is awful. And cosmically, I guess, bringing it back to this idea, why does that rattle us so much? I think it is that idea that, and I think all the characters ask themselves too, it's like, he was the good one. Why did this happen to the good one? Kind of Roy, who has his war criminal past, is like, why wasn't it me? Well, I'm the bad guy. Why wasn't I the one shanked in the middle of the night alone? So all of them, it ties into the themes of the overall story where they're all questioning what they're doing in this war. And they're like, Hughes was literally the one good one. Why does he die? And I think that resonates with us as readers in the wider world where, again, if we have this inherent bad things happen to bad people, again, you may not subscribe to it on a conscious level, but I think there's a part of it like that must be just in our cultural drilling in a deeper subconscious level. So then when something bad does happen to a good person for just no seeming reason, that strikes us as a genuine injustice that something so awful has happened to someone good.
And not only someone good, but also like he got punished for being clever and got punished for
Yes.
being like for his savvy, which was like that's part of what was so unsatisfying about it for me is it's like there's no way for the protagonist. I mean, it's how the structure is designed, but there's no way for the protagonist to get this information before he's meant to receive it, which requires the entire journey for him to get there. You can't have that huge shortcut. It's never going to happen. So it's like you feel that plot wall of like Hughes can't get the information to him because that would disrupt the entire story. And then he's also, he's punished because he figured it out. And it's like, no, dang it.
That's something that hits as well is when it's not the character's flaw that is their downfall, but their strength. Like that's some reversal that we're almost not expecting.
Yeah, true.
Oh, that's such a good point. Yeah, just a character who did everything right. He was literally doing his job. He was going to save everyone with what he's uncovered. And that's what he gets ganked for. Yeah, no, that's when you write very competent villains who still manage to, get characters even when they're at their best.
Yeah.
Great. I will move on to my next case study. I don't think either of you are across Stormlight, but that's okay.
No.
I'll do my best to paint a picture of it so you can kind of understand the pieces that went into place to make this an excellent death. So Elika, so this happens in book 2. So it's only done with book 1 and book 2, which I think is excellent, because when I went to look it up, I'm like, did he die in book 3? It was only book 2, so that means it happens much faster than I thought it did. All through book 1, Elika is the king. So he's literally the most powerful character kind of in the given circumstances. He's inherited the throne from his father, who was a force of nature. The king before him, his father was literally the one who like united all the warring factions. He did all that hard work. So he's just respected as there will never be another Gavilar kind of thing. Then he dies. That happens like literally in the prologue of the story. And then, so it's as if Elika is stepping into these boots literally no one can fill. He's set up for failure. Except he doesn't help himself. Elika is actually a shithead. He's not malicious in a Joffrey way, but he's just very, very useless. He's grown up a pampered prince. Now he's a king, and he's more interested in, well, the parties are just easier. I'll just keep up appearances. You don't actually need me to do anything, do you? So he's staying out of the politics a little bit. When people do ask for his opinion, he gives a bad opinion. Like he's just not on it. He doesn't have the skill sets to be a good king in any way, but you don't feel sympathy for him because he's constantly picking fights with everyone around him. You even knowing it's rooted in his insecurity, it still annoys you when, say, you've got the POV character of Dalinar or Kaladin or other characters you've grown to love. They're the ones who have to interface with Elika, and Elika is constantly an obstacle. They're like, the world would just be easier if Elika, you could just do this. And Elika, like a child, is like, nope, not doing it now. Just because that's his way of wanting to throw his weight around as king. He's making life hard for everyone, and it's just very frustrating. So you spend most of book 1 actually hating Elika. He's the worst. You're like, everything would be solved if he could just grow up, get his head out of his ass, and just, get on with it. And there is some genuine characters, so it's frustrating for, say, all the nobles who have to deal with him, but the level below, who are all the warriors on the battlefield, these are the warriors who are actually getting killed because of Elika's bad childish decisions. So where it's just frustrating on this level, some real hatred is starting to burble beneath the surface for all the characters who are on this social tier. And a lot of the spearmen are like, if we just killed Elika, if we killed the king, life would be so much better. And one of our POP characters across the first book has this opinion. And this POV character is beloved by the fandom. You're well sold on everything he believes at this point. So it's like, if Kaladin believes this, you believe this. You're like, yes, no, Elika does deserve a spear to the eye. That would solve a lot of our problems. You get to book 2. I'll give you a bit of backstory about how the magic system in Stormlight works. But there is this sense that you got to say the words. And essentially what that means is, if you reach the right emotional place, you'll be able to say it. Can I even remember it? Am I that much of a Stormlight fan? It's strength before weakness. Journey before destination is the last one. Oh no! Take away my fandom badge. I can't remember the other one, but that's the essence. It's a character reaches such a emotional breaking point, but then also a moment of wisdom. It's like Brandon Sanderson has gamified character arcs, because essentially once that character reaches that turning point, that moment of understanding, they unlock the right words to say, then they get their magic powers. That's how Stormlight works again and again and again. He sets up all his characters to go on this arc. So Kaladin's doing that in book 1, and it's beautiful to watch. Elika, it's important to know he's not a POV character. You're never in his head. He's just a character you observe. Elika gets a lot of losses in book 2. Dalinar, another POV character we really love by this point, is essentially running the kingdom. He's just put Elika in the naughty corner because he's like, stop. Everything you're doing is making everything worse. Let me handle the war. I will fix it. And there's actually a really satisfying scene where Dalinar beats the shit out of Elika. And at the time you're reading it, and Dalinar seems really justified. You're on Dalinar's side, and you're like, Elhokar literally did need his ass beat in this moment, and that was really satisfying. But it's all building this wonderful foreshadowing where you're accidentally getting sympathy for Elhokar when you didn't think you would. You're being strung along. And then we reach a point where there's an assassination of Elhokar brewing, this lower tier here, coming back to this hatred. Kaladin's been aware of this assassination, and for a long time it's one of his jobs is to protect Elhokar, but he's ready to kind of step aside and be like, if I see the assassin coming, I might not do anything about it. So he's kind of got that headspace for a while. But because of Kaladin's own emotional arc, he gets to a point where, wait, no, Elhokar, I'm actually going to protect people even if I don't like them. I'm a soldier. I'm going to be a good human. So Kaladin's going on that journey. He reaches a point where he's like, no, wait, I'm going to stop the assassination. I'm not going to let that happen. So he's aware of it. He's made the decision. He's going to stop it. We get this wonderful cinematic moment where we're in the middle of a battle. Elhokar has lost his own weapons. He's lost his own armor. Kaladin sees him interacting with a spren, which means he's about to save the words. So if you're a fan, you see the spren appear, you start screaming because you're like, oh my God, he's gone on his own journey. He's about to say the words. It's
Whoa.
like in the background, Elhokar's gone from this insecure boy, lashing out at everyone, literally getting beaten up by his uncle. But he's about to say the words in a moment of like crisis in this battle. Kaladin can't quite get to him, but Kaladin's like, he's going to be okay. He's going to say the words. He's going to get his magic powers. Elhokar's safe. Just then, the assassin steps in and kills Elhokar. And it's that.
No.
It's so gutting. Kaladin's watching it. There's nothing he can do. And the spren kind of ups and leaves. So the magic thing that was about to give him his powers, he's like, oh, well, can't give the powers to a corpse. Goes elsewhere. And as a fan, you're like, Elhokar was just about to learn the lessons of 2 books that he had been growing towards. He had been earning this entire moment of growth. He was about to save himself and be useful for the first time in his fucking life. And he was killed. And the fandom, if you ever look up the words fuck Moash, that's because that's the name of the assassin. And the fandom I don't know, 6 years later, has not forgiven the actual character who killed Elhokar. It's just a violent hatred at Moash who killed Elhokar. And rightfully so. I'm a very big fuck Moash fan. So we've got the brand new Stormlight book is out. I forgot to ask what we're all reading this week. Stormlight 5 is out. I've only just started, but everyone's hoping that Moash dies in this book because that will be the only justice.
There's some meta poetry happening here where now the fans have become the soldiers on the ground that have originally hated Elhokar and think he deserves a spear in the eye. Now
yes,
look at that.
So that was
look
a very
at what you've
long
become.
I know, I'm filled with the hatred that's what we need to grow out of to get our magic powers. Yes. Anyway, Stormlight's very good. I wanted to tell that whole context properly because it is just that dramatic. And the lesson I learned from reading that was kind of the masterclass in a death that is shocking, takes you by surprise, is when you interrupt the character arc. When you put the work in. So it's like, even though you as an author on a meta level, you're going to kill this character eventually, but putting the work into making this the most satisfying character arc, and then you just pull it in and you chop it here. And if that's when you take them out, that's how you can gut your audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's almost the opposite of the acceptance of death. Isn't necessarily not the acceptance of death, but the interruption of the like self-actualization, or the interruption of the character becoming the person they needed to be, is when that is just, when it happens right then, maybe at the moment of choice, or at the moment just before realization, when it comes in then and hits them, it just feels so gutting. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you told the long form version of that so that I got to appreciate it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that is a strong way of doing it for sure.
And the cheap way of doing that is, like, you see a lot of people doing it in basically doing that, but rather than dedicating the resource of 2 books to building to that, to cut it, like that's some dedication to fully write that arc and that growth just to cut it at the end or before its end. That's the end coming before the end, and that's why it hurts. But you see a lot of people doing it where the series isn't so much dedicated to it, but then you kind of in the death episode or the 2 episodes leading up to the death, suddenly there's this reframe of the person, suddenly there's this humanization, suddenly there's this thing. So that they start, you can feel the authors starting to groom the audience for the death of like, now we will prepare the audience for a death because we want to shock them. But it's just a little too scripted and you feel it like
I completely agree. You've got to be subtle with it. And Elakar was so subtle because, again, as I said, you're kind of tethered to Kaladin's POV. So you go on the same journey Kaladin goes on. You hate this guy for all of book 1 because he's genuinely putting him and the people he cares about in danger day in, day out. And then by book 2, Kaladin's the one who goes on the journey of, oh, I know he's going to be killed, and wrestling with the, do I step aside and let the assassin do it? And then he has to reach the point of, yep, no, I've got to do the right thing. I've got to be a bodyguard. And then Kaladin starts to respect Elakar, and it's just as he's earned that respect from someone like Kaladin, who is we already love as the audience. It's 2 other masterclasses that I think are doing something very similar is Robb Stark in Game of Thrones. Not so much that Robb was ever hated, but Robb had the same problem of big shoes to fill of a beloved character, needing to step into Ned Stark's shoes. Robb was actually quite competent and did a lot of things right as a warrior. And you, as an audience, you're like, cool, Robb's going to grow and become the man he needs to be, to save the Stark house. And it's the exact same thing. It's the guillotine at the moment where they're just about to actualize into something. And I think a tease, something closer to what you mentioned, Phoenix, about how can you do the short version of this. Also in Game of Thrones, I think the Viper is an excellent example of how to do this quickly. I think you've gushed about this before, James.
Yeah. That's one that gets me.
Yes, because you're just like, this character comes in with a head of steam, all this amazing backstory, all the personality in the world. So you let your guard down. You're happy to invest in, oh great, this character's going to be around for the long haul.
Absolutely.
And then they're not.
Yeah. I think what Robb Stark's story and the Viper story does well as what you were talking about, where as a reader, you're sort of expecting a certain type of story or a certain type of thing. So you kind of become invested in Robb Stark's, he's going to get justice, or he's going to get revenge, or he's the driving force of almost the reader's desire to see, things set right. So when his story gets cut off, it's so gutting. And then when the Viper steps in, he almost comes in with all this preloaded, I'm coming in from I've got all this lore from Dorne, I'm coming in with a whole backstory, I've got a whole righteous story, and like, oh great, this guy's gonna do something.
This guy's got it.
No.
Especially because in the widest scheme of things, the Viper seems like a character who should survive Game of Thrones, right? Because he's a little bit more dangerous. He's not a goody Stark. He's playing their game, so you're like, oh yeah, this guy, he's got longevity. He deserves to be here. Nah, not even that can save him.
That, I guess that's that's very well done subversion, especially for like season 1 or I guess season 1. I'm so the most shocked I've ever been by a death is Eddard Stark's death. Like that was one where literally I remember I was watching it with my partner at the time. Season 1 ended with his death, or penultimate episode of season 1, I don't remember. His death, and literally we were gonna stop watching, but it was like, oh, okay, we're gonna watch the beginning of the next episode because there's no way, like someone stepped in, someone did something. There's no way he died. Like that can't, like this is false in some way.
That's not how stories go.
This is not how exactly. This is not how stories go. This was a dream. Someone's about to wake up. I don't know what that was, but like I just got to get that confirmation. And then as we're watching the aftermath of him actually being dead, we're both just like, what? Like, what do we do now? But and it's the subversion. It's subversion in the sense that it subverts the story's structure, because we've been told the story is structured around Eddard Stark at that point, where it's like I love pulling it back to a story reduction where it's like if you were to get home and tell your mom like, guess what I got up to today, you'd never guess what happened at the mall, let me tell you, and then you set up the context to reveal what happens at the mall. It's the author setting up like, all right, let me tell you a story about Eddard Stark, and then you get to a point and it turns out it's not about Eddard Stark, and that's the subversion. It's this sudden shift in story track. Like we were tricked by the author. It was not about Ed at the end. So, I mean, it is, but it's not fully about Ed. So it's that we were tricked.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that was going to be my honorable mention for my final case study, because I think this does that exact thing really well. It's the old main character switcheroo. So every other example I've given so far aren't main characters. Wolfwood was arguably second supporting. Hughes was, you know, he's in the cast of 10, right? Because that's quite big, and he's just one of many. Same with Ellicott. He's probably in the top 10, but he's one of many. And then I think you can speak to this one, Phoenix, because I asked you to go away and read this book. Lan from Jade City. So reading, there's 3 POVs in this book. There's Lan, Shay, and Hilo. Lan is the only character that has his shit together. Shay and Hilo are both disasters. So the setting is they're all part of this family. They're a crime lord family, is my very easy summary of what's going on. So they're 3 siblings. Lan is the head. He's the oldest sibling, so all the responsibilities of being a crime lord are him. Similar setup again of the big shoes to fill of the previous generation. Very powerful parent, made the house really powerful, but now the kids have got to do it. Fun Succession like storyline. Yeah, Shay and Hilo have been spoiled. They've got some skills, but Shay lacks drive. Hilo also lacks drive and motivation and is just happy being a thug, really. While Lan's the only one who's thinking of, how do I protect this house? How do I actually navigate the politics of the warring clans in this city? He's just shouldering all the stress that's coming with this. And you also get the sense that he's a genuinely good guy. Like where Hilo's a bit of a thug and kind of likes hurting people, Lan's not really in it for that. He's just inherited this situation by being the son of a warlord and is, a crime lord, and is doing his best. At about the 50%, so they're all equally weighted POV characters, maybe even leaning towards Lan. Like if I got halfway through this book and you asked me who's the main character, I'm like, it's Lan. It's Lan's story. He's who we're following. Spoilers, he gets ganked halfway. It's quite tragic. He's been trying, this job's literally been killing him, and that you're watching him become more tired, take more drastic measures. There's a drug in this world that if you use it, you get more powerful, but it takes a hectic toll on you. So he's been taking this drug. It's really like fucking him up, but he's trying to hide it from everyone. So he's on this downward slope of like the stress is getting to him, and then he gets ganked. And at first reading it, I thought it was a Disney death. Like his chapter ends in his POV, like it's one of these fade to black, and you're like, Lan's not dead. And then the book carries on, and his body gets fished out of the river, and suddenly you're just in the POV character of the other 2 fuckabout siblings who have to be like, oh shit, our brother who was dealing with everything is now gone. And it means we now have to step up. And suddenly you realize you're reading the story of Shay and Hilo having to get their shit together in Lan's absence. And I thought it probably wasn't one of my favorite books. Like, if you ask me my favorite book, I'm not going to say Jade City, but I enjoyed it. And I just was very impressed with the execution of this particular technique. I was impressed with the execution of Lan. What was your experience reading it, Phoenix?
I was honestly a little bit relieved when it happened, because the setup for the death, he is getting more and more tired, and you see it. I was buckling in for this slow deterioration of bad decisions, family falling apart due to the strain of this drug and all this stuff. And something that I've seen many times, it's like, oh, he's starting to, like, you're watching, and it's like, oh, they're dangling this drug in front of him that's like gonna help him get more from his powers, like strengthen him up because he's like, he's got the family pressure. He's comparing himself about like with the generation before, as well as he's being compared to his little brother, who's more of that, like people are saying he's more of a warrior, so he's the one that should be leading the family and stuff. And part of like as a reader, I'm like, Helio does have more of what it takes, but Lan is the stability he has that longevity stability. So you see all the pieces coming together, the comparisons, like he's making comparisons with himself against other people. He wants to put on a strong face. And then you see that bad decision coming in. He's like, oh, is he going to make the bad decision that ruins everything inevitably? And then it's like, oh, yeah, he does. He took the drug. So I'm buckling in for this arc that I was expecting. So when he actually died, I felt relieved because I'm like, okay, I'm going to get a different story. This is going a different direction. I don't have to see because it was also, here's a character you like, prepare to watch him degrade into nothing. Like, so I was happy that he left when he was still a human, and he was still like, yes, he was tired, but he still had this rationality. He was still Lan, and he was still a believable person who was trying his best. He wasn't he wasn't fully gone. So I was glad as a reader that I was about to get something different, and that I didn't have to just have that stressor the entire time.
Because you felt for him. Yeah, you're mostly invested in Lan, yeah, and his struggle.
Yeah.
Something else that Lan's death does is, because they, like Phoenix touched on it, they set up that Hilo is almost too, not reckless, but he's too kind of, he's too quick to take on the warrior approach, the fighter approach. So they kind of set up that Lan's death is a disaster, because there's almost the implication that Hilo is going to step in. That's exactly what the villains want, kind of like. So you're in a real sense of like, oh no, the House of Cards is going to fall down. Like Lan was really keeping a lid on things because he balanced the other characters out and stuff. So that's something that works really well as well.
I didn't realize you had read it, James. But yes, that's such a good point. Yes, it's very similar to Hughes's death, I think, in that they both achieve that suddenly all the characters have to rally and fill this gap that this character leaves. But then also, and all the characters have to grow into that space. And then the death spark, it's literally tied to the plot. So both Hughes dying is a grenade and Lan dying is a grenade. And that's really exciting, that if the consequences are suddenly big and huge, that the characters, and suddenly you're writing scenes where you're doing the pain, but then you have to do the pain in a way that's, these characters have got to get on with the plot, that's suddenly not going to wait for their pain. And that's exciting drama, I guess, if you can get your plot into that shape and doing that.
I want to just bring up Stephen King's Under the Dome does something very similar to that, but it does it like quite early on, in that Under the Dome is a story in which literally a large dome just lands down on top of this small American town, and the isolation, and obviously the impact of this is one thing, but kind of the isolation as well causes one character in particular to kind of rise up and seize power, kind of taking advantage of the crisis. But something that happens very early on is there's a sort of a central focus of where there's like specifically an airplane crash as a result of the dome coming down. And that's kind of where all of the attention is focused at, and where the characters start to realize what's going on. The story is whipping around and introducing you to about a dozen characters. And the main players are coming up as the kind of typical hero, typical villain, and a character who has the potential to become a great villain, who steps into this kind of disastrous situation with the airplane crash and kind of tries to undermine everyone and make bad decisions and kind of seize control. And then there's the sheriff, and the sheriff kind of shows up and sorts everything out and works as a real balancing character to this other potential villain who is just interested in being like the big man and the power hungry man. So the story feels like it's done a great job at setting up the four main players. You know, you've got a typical hero who's an outsider, typical villain who's like the son of the powerful character who's trying to boss things around, and then the sheriff who balances out the powerful character and is making sensible decisions. And as everyone leaves this scene of the airplane crash where the dome is, the sheriff just decides, he almost leaves, and he decides to just walk over and place his hand against the dome, kind of just to make sure it's there, because none of the characters can see it. What the story has set up already is that 2 or 3 feet away from the wall of the dome, electrical things explode, essentially. So just as this character approaches the dome, and even the line that it says it in works so well, because his phone explodes, his pager explodes, and his pacemaker explodes, and the character is just gone out of the story. And because of the way the rest of the story works, like there's all these like little rippling effects. It's one of those stories where if a character arrives somewhere 5 minutes late and misses another character, there's huge consequences. And when you trace all these consequences back to the beginning, this is almost like the inciting incident that this character disappears, and it creates not a power vacuum, but he balanced the existing power structure out, and now that he was gone, things kind of really unraveled. So that's a really good character death, in that the chain of events as a result of this and the way that the story develops because of it works so well. Like, it would be a completely different story potentially if that character hadn't died that way.
Oh, I love that. It does make me think of Ned Stark again, even though Ned Stark isn't at the end of the book, but in the greater scope of A Song of Ice and Fire, it's Ned's death is this far to the front and is the huge inciting death. And it's like, if only we still kind of had this character around, everything else may not have gone to shit. Or maybe it would have. And those are fun kind of questions to ask of the narrative. Okay, folks. Did we have any last examples you wanted to share? Otherwise, I might wrap up the episode.
Just as a general tool, death is like death is like a, death is like a floodgate tool, as in like you have someone that you're actively putting tension on, where it's like they are the kingpin. That's like the reader knows as soon as we pull this person out, shit's gonna get real, and you're kind of tethering more and more significance to their death. And a good example of this is King Baratheon in Game of Thrones, where it's like, like you're just getting you're seeing the hunger of the people all around the throne, and then so it's almost like you're getting the reader like, rev up your engines because we are about to pull this pin out. And like, so it's this like, yeah, it's not Ed, it's not a protagonist, it's not someone, but you can see the main events of the story building behind the starting line of this person coming out.
One example, and I guess what this does is it's quite good for setting a tone and setting the stakes. If you're telling a story where a lot of characters are going to die, or if you're telling a horror story, The Terror by Dan Simmons has a character death in the first act, and because of the non-linear nature of how that story is told, you kind of know that this character isn't present for the most of this timeline. You know this character has died. So as the story is going along, it introduces a bunch of sailors kind of trapped in ice up in the Antarctic or somewhere, kind of the Northern Passage, and introduces that there's polar bears in the area. And this one character, kind of out of not managing the situation very well and possibly a little bit of hubris, ends up out in a kind of hide where they're sort of trying to hunt for polar bears. And sure enough, the polar bear doesn't respond to the bait that they've left. It comes into this hide, and this character's death is quite drawn out. And the whole time that it's happening, this character is done for, but this character never grasps that he's done for, because his concept of what's happening is confused. Everything's happening so suddenly. He's almost telling himself as it's happening, this is going to make a great story at a party afterwards. And he's imagining himself, I think, telling his wife or something like this about, and then this happened, and then this happened. And the death is awful. And it really sets the stakes for every other time that a character is in danger from that point on. You're thinking, am I gonna have to read through another elongated death for a character? So it sets the stakes really, really well. So I think any story where if you're going to kill a lot of characters and you're trying to figure out what's the first one, it's almost good to have it happen pretty badly, but then maybe not overdo that bad kind of death as it goes on. But also, and it's a little bit tropey to have characters in horror stories be stupid, it works really well for setting the tone of don't be stupid. If the first death is something the character does carelessly. That's my example.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. This felt like a fun little like show and tell episode where we like brought along like, oh, this thing really affected me and I thought it was very good on analysis, and then just sharing it. But I think it was just because I had that instinct of every time a death really worked for me straight away, I'm like, I need to unpack why. What were the nuts and bolts that made that work so well? So I hope, dear listeners, that you're had some inspiring takeaways that perhaps if any of our examples are similar to deaths you may want to try, you're inspired by kind of the stakes you can potentially tether to that character, how the characters around that character that set up their emotional fallout, and tie it deeply into the plot. Still, again, I'm so impressed by that Stormlight death. It's probably a masterclass for me. Like, how do you take a fandom from hating this character for one book, and then by the end of the next book, literally there's this movement called Fuck Moash where they want where they want vengeance. Like, what a just setting them up, getting people exactly where you want them, and then just like, oh, it's beautiful. It's funny because I'm reading Stormlight 5, and I don't think Branderson's like the best writer. Like, there's sentences where I'm like, still, you don't need that sentence. Cut it, Brandon. These are, they're just real basic language. But in terms of being a master storyteller, like, holy shit.
Well done, Brandon.
Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I tried looking up a quick quote, but it turns out when you Google like quotes on death, that is a rabbit hole you don't need to go down. It was expansive and large, and I don't think it's possible to summarize death in a single pithy phrase. So I will take the artistic stance of not delivering a quote for this episode.
Wow. Inspired.
Yeah.
Okay.
Poignant. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. You'll get this episode after our 100th episode, so it's so amazing that you were on this ride for us for over 100 episodes. Still many good stuff coming, including a new anthology. And before you buy that one, buy our first anthology called The New Mythic. Give it a rating, rate this podcast.
If you have a death that has impacted you in a story or something, put it in a comment, throw it in there. Tell us why. We'll probably talk about it in the next episode. Just give it a little honorable mention, but do that. It'd be cool to know.
I love how you added the small appendices. Death of a character.
Yeah.
I don't know how helpful we can be if you just write in about a general death you've experienced.
Yeah.
And talk about it. Like, that's great. I would just say that we're maybe not the experts.
This isn't the podcast to talk about that.
We might not bring up, your personal loss on the podcast. Can't guarantee that'll happen. But if it's a character death, then yes.
Yes.
We can talk about it. Fictional deaths only.
Yeah.
We'll see you all soon.
Goodbye.
Bye.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.